Some GitLab. So I have been talking about CI/CD. I've been talking about automating boring things, just because if you do business and you work in technology, or even if you don't work in technology and you have to deal with technology, chances are you've probably dealt with a number of boring things. So I want to talk about how businesses basically help make systems more reliable, more dependable. And then also, one of the challenges that anyone who's worked in the tech sphere faces constantly is there's an ongoing risk of, if you're not prioritizing development properly and releases are starting to be all over the place and there starts to be like too much disarray, then the alternative is people end up having to basically just work a lot more. And by a lot more, I mean people can be working a lot more. And so if you've spoken to anyone who works in the tech sphere, whether they're a remote worker or someone who goes to an office, especially if someone's like a software engineer, and if you live with someone who does software development, or you are one, there are those long nights of dealing with, like buffer overflows and things like that, and just digging through lines of code for who knows what reason. There are times when things like data entry might be mandatory, and sometimes, depending on how we prioritize and start to structure our business, the way that our business is structured can impact how much we end up having to work as well. So if a business does not have, say, a framework that helps people understand what the business's priorities are and the things that make a business work and flourish, then things might look all nice and pristine on the surface, but things might not quite be as they seem beneath the surface. So hiding behind this bear, I'm trying to find how to see, so you can see there's something hidden, a hidden message that I'm trying to share with you. It's hidden. So, but really though, aside from my see-through green shirt, things under the hood start to get a lot messier. So recently I've been teaching CI/CD and automation in the DevSecOps dojo for Cloud Underground. For anyone who's curious about what we do, you can check out my LinkedIn profile, or you can check out the link in the description on YouTube to learn more about the kinds of concepts that we talk about. But lately we've been using Final Fantasy XIV as an application to kind of help teach how business automation works, how you can basically use automation to make it so that you can focus on what matters in your business. So if you're trying to do like creative work or presentational work or different things like that, then it's important to know how can I make sure that I can manage my time so that I have time to actually do my streams or run my business or do the creative work or be in front of my customers. So like even doing this stream right here, I have a series of automations that are allowing me to be on YouTube. I am also on LinkedIn, and then I also have to make sure that I have different resources running. So for example, I build little cloud environments that are uniform. So this is an example of one cloud environment on one piece of hardware that's very different from the hardware that this is sitting on. And while they all look the same, I work in what's called agnostic development. So I just showed you 3 different systems just now and minimized their screens to show they all look the same. They all work the same way. And if I'm trying to set up something like, for example, let's say that I'm trying to build, say, automations for doing streams. I'm doing a stream right now. And then I'm also streaming Final Fantasy XIV and showing how do you do professional streaming and that sort of a thing, which if I'm doing streaming as an actual business, then that means that I have business overhead, which means that I have things that I have to manage that are generally pretty boring in order to even be able to get to doing my streams, which is, I might have to plan out what's my content supposed to look like. What am I going to be talking about today? Why am I going to talk about that sort of a thing? Then it's like, okay, well, I got to go and set some stuff up. I got to configure my tools. I got to configure servers. So one of the things that I'm doing is this very stream that I'm doing right now, including my Final Fantasy XIV streams, I am hyper converging my server infrastructure into a container so that I can automate streams for broadcasts. There are reasons why I'm doing this, because then I'm going to take that, and while I'm going to also be, running businesses that I've been running with automation, I'm going to use that to launch a new business called Next Level Marketing for their infrastructure, and so I am being able to test many systems very quickly because I have lots of automation that's pre-configured, so that instead of spending months per business on all of their IT and infrastructure and months to do all of those cloud configurations, so if I want to make a bunch of companies, or I want to set up a bunch of different product lines or supply chains, or work with a bunch of clients, then suddenly the more work I get and the more clients I get, then I have all of these things taking me away from my clients. I have all of these things taking me away from how I can provide value to those who I aim to serve. So let's go ahead and take a look at some recommendations for how you can kind of get into DevSecOps. So we have a heavy focus on DevSecOps in general. So I'll just minimize myself here. So we have a huge focus on DevSecOps, and for anyone who isn't sure what DevSecOps is, then that's referred to oftentimes as shift left. So if you've ever heard of the concept of shifting left, that is moving into DevSecOps. So if we take a look at this here, the link to this is in the description. So if you are not able to, some of the text here is cut off, so maybe I'll just resize this. That's good enough. So we've got this resource here, and we're going to take a look at 10 tips from GitLab around how you can shift left. So then not only are you finding ways to automate more time in your day, but there's also risk involved with doing things very quickly. And so if you're just building an automation for this and building an automation for this, and you're doing all things kind of willy-nilly all over the place, then you can end up with a bunch of unsecure code and unsecure resources that can put whatever you're trying to accomplish at risk. And so sometimes there is an adverse, I guess, counter side to doing things quickly, because if you're moving too fast without any strategy, without any forethought, without a pre-configured framework, something along those lines, disaster is inevitably going to strike at some point. So let's just kind of talk about some of these talking points here. This is going over 10 tips to help your teams shift left into a more efficient DevSecOps. Now, you can come talk to us directly in the DevSecOps dojo. So if you go to cloudunderground.dev, that is a place where you can come and find us directly and have conversations with us. So one of the important ones is measure your time. Think about how long do certain tasks take. And if you have certain things that you're doing over and over and over and over again, and you know for sure that maybe it's even like a written down process, like this is a checklist that a company uses, you'll find that if you've worked with a number of companies, there will be a lot of checklists of very manual things that someone could go and pack into a repository, and maybe it is a little more time up front for maybe 2 or 3 months, maybe up to 8 months. But if you have the ability to chew on those 8 months or 3 months or however long it takes to automate some of these manual checklists, having workers go through manual checklists can be slow and mundane, and then it also burns people out. So I think burnout is one of the things that oftentimes gets dismissed when doing too many manual things. I've recommended automating things to people before, and they're like, well, but what else are they going to do? You'll automate people out of a job. Actually, you automate people out of burnout. Believe it or not, the idea of automating someone out of a job, that's like saying that ChatGPT can completely replace people, and to an extent you can replace certain things and tasks, but you still have to have someone who's going to review things, look at stuff, and make sure that things are looking pretty good. And then another one is bottlenecks. If you have certain things that maybe are like barriers to enrolling more customers, or barriers to you being able to run certain processes. A bottleneck could be something like you're trying to figure out how to move data into the cloud from like on-prem locations, or log into like across different networks that aren't in the same data center location. There could be a lot of things that you might be trying to do, and then maybe certain configurations just take a long time, and you're sitting there and you're like, this is a bottleneck. It's causing us to potentially lose business, or we might not be able to enroll things as quickly as we need to, and maybe it's impacting customers and customer experiences. And so that's another thing where we want to understand what bottlenecks are present. And it's also really important to start small. Oftentimes I see folks, so I'll use an example because I come from working in security, information, and event management. And one of the things that I see when people are setting up like their first SIM in an environment is they tend to want to just log everything. They're like, log all the things. Let's just log as much as we can. Let's just turn on all the features. Let's just do all the logging. And let's just try to do everything right now. And then the next thing they know, they end up having unexpected billing spikes and unexpected other things, and there's just so much going on if you try to move too quickly with things that it can actually be worse than just the idea of, well, just get it done can become a dangerous thing if we're trying to do too much. You want to there's a stupid joke. It's like, how do you eat an elephant? It's like one bite at a time. And I don't know why that joke is. There you go. One bite at a time. It's the same with automation. Working with automation is kind of like working on an elephant. And so if you've ever looked at platforms like Zapier and things like that, notice that platforms like Zapier focus on setting up one Zap or one automation at a time. Zapier, for the most part, until you have one Zap completed, you're not going to have a Zap. You can't have 30 Zaps until you build out 30 Zaps one at a time. And if you try to do them all at once, then you're just not going to have, that's just not going to get completed very quickly. It could be a journey. Now, eliminating waterfall, as we read here, are people still holding on to waterfall style security processes? So when we're talking about like the concept of like upstream, downstream, so on and so forth, eliminating or reducing waterfall will help your organization prevent the struggle to change direction as needed. So this also impacts the concept of lock-in. So if you've ever heard of things like vendor lock-in, if you are trapped in a waterfall sort of architecture or based workflow, then you're also going to experience, if you need to make changes in your business, then making changes or migrations is also something that might end up being a lot more costly or expensive, and it kind of takes away your options, flexibility, and capacity to control what you're trying to accomplish. So if we keep going here, we have demonstrate compliance. So sometimes if we're thinking about things like HIPAA and other regulatory compliances, PCI, things like that, you actually have to have test environments, and you have to have ways to test and demo and sample. And when you're trying to like show or prove that whatever you're going to implement for HIPAA or PCI or something along those lines, and you're like, hey, I'm going to prove, that this meets the requirement that my company has to face or meet, then it's really important, if you're trying to run that test, that when you move to production from your test environment, that whatever you made generally works how it looked in testing. So if you don't have a sane way to test your resources or test your processes, then that's going to create more overhead, and it also creates added risk. And by risk, we mean, what if you start failing compliance controls? You're going to get fines. So this starts to cost a business money. And if you're not going to pay those fines, then that could maybe cost you your business or cost you your ability to run your company, and it might no longer be a company that you're able to run for various reasons. So then security reports, if anyone has ever heard of a vulnerability scan, you could think of SAST or DAST if you're using something like Nmap and you're scanning for vulnerabilities, or using something like Snike. There are different types of tools that can be used for scanning, and GitLab has resources built in where you can come in and go to your settings and you can check out your CICD configurations, and it has an option for auto DevOps, just kind of hanging out in the CI/CD configurations when you're setting up a repository. So if you have an application and it's running in a repository and you're always going and, okay, we got to run the pen test again, and maybe you're running the same pen tests and you're running the same security scans and you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. Well, you can CI/CD that, and then you don't have to go and manually spend all that time on your reports, and then you can automate that reporting, which can save a significant amount of time. So going back to our items here, when we're trying to set up environments where we want to be able to do collaborations safely and securely, when we're working with resources like Git, one of the reasons why we like working with resources like Git is you can have a bunch of individuals who are working for your company, and you can work over what's called merges, where you could think of it as like a code review process. You can set up clear, sane, easy to process merge requests. It's like basically, hey, you made some code and now you need to turn it in. So if you've ever gone to high school or elementary school or college, depending on what you're doing for your studies, you have varying degrees of like how hard an assignment might be, and then if you turn in your assignment, then you've basically merged. You could think of it that way. So it's like turning in your assignment is kind of like, oh, you can merge that in now. And then if someone working on that code review kicks back your merge, then maybe you failed, and then you got to go and do your assignment again and then send it back to them. So there are different ways that you can work with small teams. And if someone, let's say that you have a worker working from home and their environment, maybe they're bringing their own device, and then that individual gets hit with malware or something along those lines, if they aren't necessarily in your environment, in your server space and all those things, then you don't really have to worry about that malware necessarily impacting your company. You might have to figure out if their credentials have been stolen or something along those lines. So, you can do things. There are things like Breach Watch and stuff like that, there's like all kinds of tools that do Breach Watch types of things. If you've never heard of Breach Watch, look up Breach Watch. You can identify if like a password's been stolen or something along those lines. So if you have something like that, then you just make sure that people's credentials aren't getting breached. And if someone's credentials aren't breached from some of who knows what going on their network, then for the most part, then we can call that zero trust. And there's a reason why people talk about zero trust in marketing, and it gets thrown around as a buzzword, even though zero trust is not actually a buzzword. Zero trust is an actual thing. But you can also just ditch the tool chain. Now, what this means, so I'll read what this says. It says here, streamline and reduce your tool chain so that employees can focus their attention on a single interface, single source of truth. So you can think of Git. So if I'm building an environment where my Final Fantasy 14 configurations for these streams that I'm going to be doing every Tuesday, so I will be doing Q&As every Tuesday, and I'm going to build all of my automations for my stream environment in this. This is called a Git BIOS. If someone has never heard of a Git BIOS before, let's go take a look at what is a Git BIOS. So what I'm doing is I'm automating an entire streaming data center, and basically, so I mentioned that I'm hyper converging a stream center, right? Basically, I have a physical room and I have a physical server, and I'm streaming from that physical server, and my goal is to make it so that this server is no longer a physical device, or no longer requires a physical device for me to do my streams, where I can pack everything that lets me do my streams into, say, a container. And then if I pack everything into a container, then I can easily toss that container up into the public cloud. So I'm going to be actually doing this in the next coming weeks, so anyone who's following me can watch me actually do real CI/CD and automate a real business, because that's what I like to teach, by just doing the real thing. So if anyone's been following me since 2020, I teach by doing real commerce. If anyone has been in the DevSecOps dojo, a lot of you are making money by doing the things. So if anyone's wondering who to talk to about that sort of thing, I'll do a shout out here. But Christopher Ballard is the person who's taken the reins on learning how to master sales within the DevSecOps dojo. So anyone who wants to go and see someone who's been using all of these things to make a living and an income all on their own, go look for Christopher Ballard, ask him how he makes 100% of his living in the CICD life, DevSecOps style. Anyways, what a Git BIOS does is Final Fantasy, since I have it currently running inside of a physical server in one location, by packing all of my infrastructure into a hyper-converged structure like a container where it's now software and not like a physical server, then this Git BIOS is effectively the entire configuration that I require to run my business. And then that way, if I need to move my business, I can move my business into Linode or DigitalOcean or AWS or Azure. And if I configure it up front, then it's just a matter of a copy paste, which I can deploy with a GitLab runner. So I can basically just configure GitLab runners. So if you don't know what a GitLab runner is, it's a GitLab resource for running CI/CD. I can configure one of these GitLab runners right here where it says runner, which I'm not going to get into this configuration during the webinar. But I can put that everywhere that I want to set up my broadcast infrastructure and resources, right? And then that way, instead of me going to every environment, so maybe I have to set up Azure, maybe I have to set up Linode, maybe I have to set up a few physical locations. What if I don't want to do any of that? I hate doing that. I do, really. I've only done these things because if I do it once, then I'll never have to do it again. So I can just do this thing that I don't really enjoy doing one time. Do I want to hire people? Not really. Do I want to pay a lot of money that I don't really want to spend on help, or lose a lot of time, or not live my life because I could be manually configuring? Nope. I'm just going to toss one of these runners in all of the locations that I want my streaming broadcasts to work from. And then from this one source of truth, is what we would call that, then this source of truth can control all of my studio deployments. And so this is how I'm also testing. I'm using this to benchmark my infrastructure because we are building an actual media studio, so that I don't want to have to be able to teach all these creators how to build infrastructure. I don't want to teach a bunch of creators who specialize in film how to do code. I don't want to have to tell them how to install their software. I don't want to have to teach them anything. I just want to come in here and say, hey, here's an application, run this application, and it's basically a whole server that has a whole studio in it. Just use what's in there. And then if they're like, oh, could you add this application? Yep, add an application for them. And they're like, wow, now I have this application that you just magically made appear inside of my environment. So then by centralizing over a source of truth, I can do almost anything in an instant now just by having runners connected to this one source of truth. I can have servers all over the world. I can have people working at their homes where if once again, maybe they get breached, or maybe someone else gets, or maybe I get breached, or maybe, who knows? Maybe half the team gets breached, but whoever's not getting breached doesn't get breached with everybody else. Everything's contained in a zero trust format. And then our main thing is to protect our source code, basically that source of truth. So this environment here is kept off of the public cloud, and then it's mirrored up to the public cloud. So this is the public cloud mirror of our protected code, which is basically like a source code. So this is the underground nexus, which is what everything that we do is based on. So this is how we run Git BIOS and automate basically server infrastructure wherever we want it to be. And we know for sure that it's going to provide the same experience no matter who's using it. We can generally assume that the behaviors and bugs and errors, everyone troubleshoots the same way. If I fix a problem for one person, it'll fix the problem for everyone else. I don't want to have to fix the same problem for 100 users ever. I want to just, well, I guess I do want to fix the same problem for 100 users, but I don't want to do it myself. I don't want to manually do it. I want to fix it for one client, And then I don't have to do those configurations ever again. And then I just paste these resources places. How is this even possible, you might ask? It's possible because we spent years building the Underground Nexus. And the Underground Nexus is free open source that anyone can use, and it is powered by GitLab. So if we take a look at what a Git BIOS engine looks like, and we're talking about, you know, what kinds of things can you automate, how many ways can you automate things. This is the stack that we use. So the way that we do things is we keep our source code in GitLab. So you're looking at exactly that. So let me go to GitLab. We keep our source code here, keep the source code safe, keep it off, you know, the internet. Or I guess you can put Nexus in another location, but it's a hardened structure one way or another. It's a little more isolated than just throwing something out in the public web. So anyways, then with GitLab, our runners, why is this relevant, is that GitLab runners, let's say that someone attacks our GitHub environment. Let's say that GitHub gets attacked, since this is where we integrate everything. Well, my Final Fantasy stream won't be impacted by this being breached, which is amazing. I don't want my business to be impacted by what happens in the public cloud. So maybe there's some big breach in the news or something. I don't care, as long as I go and change my passwords here, update all these things, and then clean that up, because ultimately I can keep my resource here off of the public cloud. And then my runners, that way all my automations are safe too. So I keep my automations off of the public cloud, where then I have also the scale for like paying for compute and CPU and all of that gets expensive. But if I'm running my runners on my own systems and my own compute, it helps me manage my billing, and it helps me manage my costs as well, because saving money is so nice. So if we have the public cloud and it's expensive and it costs a lot of money, then we can have our private cloud and we can make that not cost us a lot of money as well. And then it also helps give us more control over our budgeting costs, which is amazing, because being able to predict your billing is one of the most amazing things in business. For anyone who's ever dealt with managing their own billing, manageable billing. I love manageable billing. And you can choose if you want to start. Oh, it keeps changing. I just want to keep it on this one. So let's see. Let's just go to it. Anyways, so it's good stuff. And then in terms of managing all of our containers and container infrastructure, Portainer is a great way, especially if you use like Portainer Business Edition. Portainer Business Edition gives you like free 5 nodes for your first 5 nodes. But if you're working with a Kubernetes-based environment, it has a resource that allows you to just basically like spin up clusters in DigitalOcean, Linode, or Civo like in the blink of an eye. So regardless of where you have your Underground Nexus or GitLab that is like hardened and tucked away, if you upgrade in the Underground Nexus the Portainer into the Portainer Business Edition, then you can basically like slingshot Kubernetes clusters so fast, so easily. It's really, like, if you try it, it's night and day. Just try spinning up some clusters with Portainer Business Edition in, say, like Civo and DigitalOcean, and it's, once you've tried it, you'll want to find other things that are that efficient. Once you've done it, it's hard to go back. And then GitKraken is something that we do use as well, even though GitKraken has a free tier which you can use as a Git UI for, say, like the Underground Nexus. The paid tier of GitKraken is really handy, especially if you are a team who works with a lot of different Git resources. So if you're using like GitLab, GitHub, it can be a little crazy to navigate all of it all together in one looking lens. If anyone is not sure what GitKraken is, GitKraken is this thing right here, where we can take a look at, I don't know, our repositories, our work, and you can see that there's just a lot going on over the many years that our repositories have been doing things. There are some really cool things about Git in general, and I think GitKraken does a really good job at making it easier to inspect things that are going on. So if you're wondering what like some strange activity is with something, all of this information here is basically a UI showing this front end, basically this is all the same like data set. And so this is what Git looks like when you're just looking at, say, like GitHub. But if we're trying to, say, like visualize GitHub, visualize what's going on to our stuff in a maybe an easier way or a more detailed way, or we want to deep dive into what's going into our source of truth, right? Then we have the ability with Git to kind of come in here and see like, oh gosh, what is this thing right here? Is this like a new branch that I care about? Or what's this? What is this? What is whatever we're looking at? You can come in here and just click on something, and it will tell you whatever changes were made. This is called either like diff or blame. This will actually show you blame if you want to see blame. So let's see if we can show off some blame here. So if we open any, let's just open this and go back to this thing and say blame. Blame lets us just kind of dig. We can just keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and we can do some pretty cool stuff. So anyways, why is it worth automating boring things? Oh, this is a cool thing too. So anyone who's using, this is random. This is really random. Recently I built a universal patch manager for the Underground Nexus, and I made it so that you can, from this mate terminal, you can enter, this is so random, but it's automation. So I'm going to show you some automation that I made that saves me some sanity. Every single Sunday, the Underground Nexus runs a patch. It manages its patching. So it'll go and then it'll add whatever new updates or changes that are made to the Underground Nexus. So once you pull an Underground Nexus structure, it'll just do that forever. So notice right here, it's got like this little green, it says workbench. It might be a little hard to see here, but just look at the colors. This is Ubuntu. So if I say uname -i, it'll tell us that it's Linux. And then if I type this command here, then I can enter into like it goes into a separate container, but it goes into the root terminal of the entire Underground Nexus, and it has, well, I don't know if it would say it, but it goes into a Kali Linux shell. So this is actually Kali Linux. And then, so you can go from Ubuntu to Kali Linux with a single command, and then in Kali Linux, it injects updates from Kali Linux with this thing called Dagger. And so notice if I just run it, it'll tell us that Dagger is installed. It will tell us that we can start using it, different things like that. And so you can actually use that, and you can install, say, like GitLab runners inside of this system to basically have like runner and Dagger powered automation structures, and then you can pre-configure them all. So this is pre-configured to already have Dagger, so it's a portable CI pipeline with or without GitLab runners. It always does CI. So the Underground Nexus is a CI/CD structure that is all managed, patched, and updated 100% with all CI/CD everything. And then it also does its own vulnerability scans, so we do our own vulnerability scans ourselves with CI/CD. So anytime I go in on the official, now this is for Final Fantasy of course, but anytime I go and make changes to anything for the official, say, Underground Nexus or the things that I work with, I don't even have to go look at all the systems that it's associated with. All of the systems just start doing whatever they're doing. There'll be some scans going off. There'll be some builds going on. It actually will go through and full on test the images for me. And then it'll even tell me if something failed or if I had a misconfiguration. And it will also automatically block pushes to production for me if it's like, whoa, now this configuration's terrible and it's broken and it's not allowed to go to production. So I even have this thing automatically smack me if I'm trying to send some bad code to production. It's like, whoa, you can't send that to production, smack. And then it smacks me in the face. Maybe that's a little extreme. But anyways, really though, automate things. It's amazing. I love automation. I hope you love automation. And it's worth figuring out what hides beneath the surface and things, because if you see really highly efficient companies, you could do things that are highly efficient too. And you could build all kinds of crazy automations behind the scenes, the stuff that no one really cares to do, that keeps you away from your audience, from your customers, from having time to do things that you really want to do. Basically, this is what hides beneath the surface of big companies, even LinkedIn and companies like Facebook and all these. This is what's hiding beneath the surface. Automation, it's amazing. We're going to talk more about it still, because